It was 1962, at the height of the Cold War, that an overwhelming anxiety about what was to come was balanced by man's faith in the power of science and its power to secure our safety and prosperity. Then came an incredible book that sowed seeds of doubt in many.
This is one of the nation's best sellers, first printed on September 27, 1962.
At the center of the storm was Rachel Carson, a celebrated American writer of her time. Her first 3 books, A Beautiful Trilogy of the Sea, Carson opened up the nation's eyes to the beauty of nature. Now, in Silent Spring, she delivered the sinister warning that humans may soon destroy it.
These sprays, dust, and aerosols are now applied almost universally to farms, gardens, forests, and homes. Non-selective chemicals that have the power to kill every insect, the good and the bad, to still the song of birds and the leaping of fish in the streams, all this, though the intended target may be only a few weeds or insects.
Miss Carson maintains that the balance of nature is a major force in the survival of man, whereas the modern chemist, the modern biologist, the modern scientist believes that man is steadily controlling nature. If man were to faithfully follow the teachings of Miss Carson, we would return to the Dark Ages, and the insects and diseases and vermin would once again inherit the earth.
While Carson didn't contend that chemical insecticides must never be used, she faced harsh opposition.
A spokesman for the chemical industry, Dr. Robert White Stevens. The major claims in Miss Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, are gross distortions of the actual facts, completely unsupported by scientific experimental evidence and general practical experience in the field.
When Rachel Carson first released Silent Spring, the thought was that human ingenuity would triumph over nature. Carson, being environmentalist since birth, knew different. She argued for caution. The big chemical companies viewed Carson as a threat to their multi-billion-dollar industry. She was accused of being a communist, of being a hysterical, a crazy woman. The idea was to attack the messenger. They tried to silence her at any cost, spreading rumors, calling her a communist, and even sending death threats. Through all of this, she pushed on and continued to voice out against DDT. Carson was an unlikely hero. Quiet, demure, and dutiful, she thrust herself into the public's eye. To some, Silent Spring was an act of heroism, to others an irresponsible breach of science. But there is no dispute that with her denouncing of modern technological science, Carson had shattered a paradigm.
Now, to these people, apparently the balance of nature was something that was repealed as soon as man came on the scene. Well, you might just as well assume that you could repeal the law of gravity. The balance of nature is built of a series of interrelationships between living things and between living things and their environment. You can't just step in with some brute force and change one thing without changing a good many others.
Public places and private backyards were being treated whether people liked it or not. In 1957, planes sprayed a Massachusetts bird sanctuary owned by Olga Harkins, a friend of Carson's. In fury and desperation, Huckins told her what had happened. The bird showed all the signs of typical DDT poisoning. Huckins knew the planes would be back in spite of her protest. She asked Carson for help. Carson later remembered how the thought of the Silent Spring and birdsong had moved her to action.
It was your personal letter to me that started it all. In it, you told what had happened and begged me to find someone in Washington who could help.
Carson was convinced that there was a link between pesticide use and cancer in humans. Rachel Carson had known that scientists were divided on the use of synthetic pesticides, and the conclusion about its safety depended on who was asked. For Carson, it began with research, a gathering of bits of information excavated from technical reports and obscure scientific journals. What soon became clear was that pesticides such as DDT accumulate in the organisms exposed to them. A study showed that when birds were fed a minuscule amount of DDT daily, both their fertility and survival of their young dramatically declined. In isolation, each study Carson read was more than a little story. Put together, they offered compelling evidence that synthetic pesticides had potentially grave disadvantage, none of which we yet understood. She was not against the wise use of pesticides. She saw the need for them. But what she was against was the unstoppable spreading of poisons that had untold and unanticipated consequences for all living things, human beings included.
Dr. Paige Nicholson, water pollution expert, Public Health Service.
Do you know how long the pesticides persist in the water once they get into it?
Not entirely.
Do you know the extent to which our groundwater may be contaminated right now by pesticides?
We don't know that either, nor do we know if concentration may be occurring in groundwater.
Rachel Carson not only changed the kinds of questions we ask about the environment, but she caused us to start asking those questions. Unfortunately, Carson died on April 14, 1964, after a long fight against breast cancer. Perhaps the finest nature writer of the 20th century, Rachel Carson is remembered more today as the woman who challenged the notion that humans could obtain mastery over nature by chemicals, bombs, and space travel than for her studies of ocean life. Her sensational book, Silent Spring, warned of dangers to all natural systems from the misuse of synthetic pesticides such as DDT, and questioned the scope and direction of modern technological science. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring affected government policy. Every one of the toxic chemicals named in the book was either banned or severely restricted in the United States by 1975. Farm chemicals, pest control chemicals, and household chemicals undergo much greater scrutiny, regulation, and control than before Rachel Carson published the book, and the chemicals allowed are less deadly and used in smaller amounts. Carson's scientific perspective and rigor created a work of substantial depth and credibility that sparked widespread debate within the scientific community and the broader public about the effect of pesticides on the natural world. These discussions led to new policies that now protect our air, our water, and ultimately our health and safety. In a broader sense and longer term, Silent Spring helped create a change of attitude. It called into question a major item of faith in the 20th century, the authority of scientific experts. Most importantly, Silent Spring launched a modern global environmental movement. The ecological interconnections between nature and human society went far beyond the limited concerns of the conservation movement about conserving soils, forests, waters, and other natural resources.